Billy Maxted, January 21, 1917 in Racine, Wisconsin, October 11, 2001 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, was an American jazz pianist. Maxted started out playing and arranging for the Red Nichols Big Band from 1937 to 1940. He worked Ben Pollack, Teddy Powell and Will Bradley. He was a fine pianist and arranger. After serving in the Navy, he provided arrangements for Benny Goodman and Claude Thornhill and co-led a band with Ray Eberle, 1947-1948. His composition Manhattan Spiritual was a top 10 hit for the Reg Owen Orchestra in 1959. In New York, Maxted was a fixture at Nick's in Greenwich Village. He lived in Long Island for much of his life until he moved to Fort Lauderdale in 1961. That year, he reached the Billboard bubbling under the top 100 chart with a swing version of Satin Doll. Artist Biography, Scott Yanow writes, "A fine pianist and a skillful arranger, Billy Maxted is largely forgotten today because his recordings were mostly for tiny labels." Maxted started out playing and arranging for the Red Nichols Big Band during 1937 to 1940. He worked briefly with Ben Pollack and Teddy Powell and played with Will Bradley, 1941 to 1942, sitting in the chair formerly held by Freddie Slack. After serving in the Navy, he provided arrangements for Benny Goodman and Claude Thornhill and co-led a band with Ray Eberle, 1947 to 1948. In the late 40s, Maxted put together his own Dixieland group, the Manhattan Jazz Band, featuring his Bob Zirk-inspired Strite and boogie-woogie piano and his inventive arrangements. Maxted worked frequently as the resident pianist at Nick's during 1949 to 1960. In the 1950s, he recorded for MGM, Brunswick, a rare trio date, Cadence, and Seco. His sidemen included trumpeter Chuck Forsythe, trombonist Lee Gifford, either soul pacer Dan Tracey on clarinet, and, by 1958, bass saxophonist Johnny Dangler. During 1961 to 1963, Maxted recorded 3 albums for the Forgotten K&H label, but his best-known albums are 2 rather uncharacteristically commercial sets for Liberty in 1966. In addition, he appeared on records by Pee Wee Irwin, Bob Crosby, and Red Nichols. Not much was heard from the pianist after the late 60s. Maxted had moved to Florida earlier in the decade, and he died in Fort Lauderdale on October 11, 2001. Discography: 1955 Hi-Fi Keyboards, Billy Maxted. 1955 Pee Wee Irwin at the Grandview Inn. 1955 Jazz at Nick's, Billy. 1955 Dixieland Manhattan Style, Billy Maxted. 1958 Dixieland Manhattan Style, Billy Maxted. 1959 Jazz at Nick's Cadence. 1959 Bourbon St. Billy and the Blues. 1959 The Art of Jazz Seco. 1961 Swingability. 196. Need It Be Named. 1963 The Big Swingers K&H. 1966 Maxted Makes It. Liberty.